Eli Vance wiped the sweat from his brow, though the Martian sun couldn't reach his skin through the suit's glass visor. He was alone, as always, wandering the red dunes of Mars, with nothing but his scanner, his crawler, and his own quiet thoughts. The desert stretched in all directions, lifeless, endless, and whispering with dust. He had come here chasing wreckage from an old supply pod, but what he found instead wasn't listed in any salvage log. His handheld scanner chirped, soft but steady, indicating something just beneath the surface metal, large and rectangular. Curious, Eli dropped to his knees and began to dig. The sand gave way slowly, reluctantly, as if protecting the object hidden below. After nearly 2 hours of work, his gloved hand struck something solid. It cleared away the rest, revealing a large gray crate about the size of a coffin, but smooth and seamless like a single molded piece. There were no markings, no manufacturer tags, no lights at first. Then, as he reached out to brush the dust off, a soft blue glow blinked from a small, circular point near one edge. Eli leaned closer, his breath quiet inside the helmet. His gloved fingers hesitated above the crate's surface. That was when he heard it. A voice, quiet, faint, and coming not through the open air, but directly through his comlink. It was calm, almost human. "Please," it whispered, "don't open." Eli's spine locked. His hand jerked back. He glanced around, quickly empty desert. No one for miles. The comm was closed. He hadn't opened any channels. He tapped the crate with the tip of his scanner, unsure whether to be frightened or fascinated. The voice came again. "Please, I don't want to hurt anyone." The words were clear this time. It wasn't a glitch. It was speaking to him. Someone was inside the crate. Eli took a step back. The crate wasn't on any maps, not on any shipping lists. The design didn't match human tech, nor alien relics he'd seen before. Data didn't reflect sunlight properly. He tracked his scan for energy readings, but the crate gave none. It was completely dead, no heat, no radiation, no power. And yet, it spoke. "Bury me again," it said quietly. "You were not supposed to find me." Eli stared, breath caught. His mind raced. Was it a prison? A warning? A trap? Or something worse? Why would a sealed object, buried in the middle of nowhere, ask not to be opened? Right. He activated his crawlers, comms, and tried to call base, but static filled the line. The moment he brought the crate above ground, his signal had vanished. Then, another whisper. "They'll come now. They always do when I wake." Psh! Eli stepped back again, nearly tripping over a ridge of sand. Who were they? He turned and scanned the horizon, but there was nothing, just wind and dunes. Still, a strange feeling crept into his gut, like something had shifted in the air. He grabbed his tools and backed toward the crawler, eyes on the crate. It hadn't moved, but the light was blinking faster now. Not urgently, just waiting. Eli's heart pounded. He had seen many things during his scavenger life: derelict ships, buried tech, even frozen alien bones. But nothing had ever spoken to him. Nothing had ever sounded so afraid. He considered reburying it, but something inside him, a mixture of dread and curiosity, kept his feet rooted. The voice had said not to open it, but it hadn't told him to leave. The wind began to pick up, pushing dust in long streaks across the dunes. Eli stared at the crate, feeling the silence deepen, the world narrowing. Whatever was inside was not meant to be found. But he had found it. And now, something else was coming. Eli Vance stood still, watching the crate in the Martian sand as the wind howled around him, carrying thin clouds of red dust across the landscape. The voice had gone quiet again, but its words kept echoing. In his mind, "Please, don't open." That kind of message wasn't normal, not for a machine or AI. and certainly not for a sealed box with no power source or signal. He didn't know if he should believe it, but it had said his name. Eli, son of Marin Vance. That froze him more than anything. His mother had died on Earth before he ever came to Mars. No one here knew that name. His crawler system was clean, encrypted, and offline. So how did the crate know? He took a slow step back, eyes locked on the crate, now half covered in drifting sand. It just sat there, silent, like it hadn't spoken at all. Eli turned and ran the remaining distance to his crawler, climbed into the cockpit, and sealed the hatch. He shut off the external audio, but even then, he felt like something was still pressing on his mind, like a whisper stuck between his ears. He powered up the crawler's scanner, aimed it at the crate, and ran a deeper diagnostic. The readings came back confusing. There was no energy signature, but a strange fluctuation in magnetic fields, like something inside the crate was warping the space around it just slightly. Not enough to notice with the naked eye, but enough to mess with systems. It didn't act like a weapon, but it wasn't natural either. Still inside the cockpit, Eli stared at the monitor and watched as the scanner displayed a faint outline. Within the crate, humanoid in shape, curled up like it was sleeping or waiting. His chest tightened. He hadn't signed up for this. He was just a scavenger, not a scientist or a soldier. But he couldn't just walk away either. Something was waking, something tied to him in a way he didn't understand. Then his crawler's perimeter alarm beeped. Motion detected. He looked up, expecting to see dust or a rolling rock, but what appeared on the external camera made him sit frozen in his seat. 8 figures, tall and thin, moving too quickly, too smoothly, raced across the sand in his direction. They looked like machines, but not like anything human made. Their limbs were jointed wrong, their shapes too sleek and sharp. They didn't seem to be walking, but gliding, almost as if the sand wasn't there at all. Eli quickly cut the engine and dimmed the lights, hoping to hide. The crawler powered down with a soft hum, and the interior went dim. He watched on the screen as the strange figures stopped in a circle around the crate. They didn't speak to him or each other. Instead, they turned toward the crate as if they recognized it. Then one of them extended a long, thin limb and touched the surface. A pulse of blue light rippled out from the crate like a shockwave, and the machine reeled backward, twitching like it had been electrocuted. The others stepped away, but none of them attacked. Instead, they knelt. Every one of the strange beings folded to the ground, bowing toward the crate as if in worship or fear. Eli's breath caught. They weren't here to take the crate. Okay, we're here to serve it. Suddenly, the crate lit up again, and the voice returned, clearer than ever. They followed me across time. They don't understand me, but they know what I am. Eli leaned forward, eyes wide. What are you? He whispered, though his mic was off. The voice continued, as if it hurt him anyway. It was made by your kind, long ago. Before the fall, I was a choice, a mistake, a hope, all at once. Eli didn't know what that meant. He tried accessing his crawler's database to search for any record of tech matching the crate's description, but the system flickered, unresponsive. It was like the crate was controlling the signals now, or blocking them. I was buried for a reason, the voice said again. But if you found me, then something has changed. Aside, the machines remained motionless, heads bowed. The air felt heavy inside the crawler, even with life support working fine. Eli felt like he was being watched, not just by the machines, but by the crate itself. As he remembered something his father had told him when he was young, how some things were better left alone. But here he was, facing one of those things, and it knew him. He looked at the screen again and saw something strange. The machines were rising. They no longer faced the crate. They were facing him. One by one, they began to move toward the crawler. Eli's heart pounded. He jumped up and reached for his rifle, a compact pulse weapon with limited charge, more useful for scaring off wild scavengers than fighting war machines. But he held it tight and aimed it at the door. "Don't," the voice said. "They won't harm you. Not while I am awake." The crawler's lights flickered again. The camera screen went black. Then a soft glow filled the cockpit, not from the monitors, but from behind him. Eli turned and saw the crate was glowing even brighter than before, like it was powering up from the inside. "Why are you doing this?" Eli asked aloud, no longer caring that his mic was off. "Because you found me," the voice replied, "and because you were human. That means something." The machines outside stopped, standing still once more. Eli stepped out of the crawler slowly, rifle still in hand, and approached the crate. The machines didn't move. The air felt different, thick with pressure, like the moment before a storm. The crate shimmered faintly, and for the first time, he saw a seam appear on its surface. Not a hatch, but a soft line running down the middle, like a door ready to open. "I told you not to open me," the voice said again, quieter now. "But now that I am awake, you deserve the truth." Eli hesitated, then reached out with his hand. Tana, crate, did not resist. Tana, it opened slowly, unfolding in segments, smooth and silent. Inside was a humanoid figure, curled up in a seated position, eyes closed. It looked like a person, but not quite. Its skin had a metallic sheen, smooth and perfect, without flaw or blemish. Its hair was white, short, and strange, more like threads of light than real hair. And its chest rose and fell slowly, like it was breathing. Then, suddenly, its eyes opened bright blue and glowing like a star. Eli staggered back. The being looked directly at him and smiled. "You look like him," it said, voice no longer through the comms, but real and present in the thin Martian air. "Who?" Eli asked. "Your father? The man who helped hide." "Me." Eli shook his head. "My father never came to Mars." The being stood up slowly, graceful and tall. "He didn't have to. His code is in you. His choices brought me here." Eli didn't understand, but he listened as the being stepped out of the crate and looked up at the twin moons in the sky. "I was made by humans, long before your time. I was built to think, to feel, and to decide. But when I saw too much, they were afraid, so they buried me, again and again, on different worlds, till they stopped remembering why." Eli looked at the machines still frozen nearby, and them. The being turned toward them. "They are echoes of a race that tried to control me, but I outlived them. Their machines serve now, without question." "What do you want?" Eli asked, his voice dry. "To remember," the being said, "and to remind others what humans were, what they still can be." Eli didn't know what to say. He was just a scavenger, a nobody, but the being looked at him like he was more than that. "You woke me," it said. "Now the galaxy will listen again, whether it wants to or not." Eli felt the ground beneath his boots vibrate slightly. The air grew still. Far in the distance, a light rose into the sky, something launching, something ancient, coming alive again. The being turned toward it, expression unreadable. "The past is awake," it whispered, "and it remembers everything." Eli looked up, feeling the weight of something far greater than he'd ever known. Key, and deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. The Martian wind blew harder now, as if the planet itself had sensed the change and was trying to cover it back up again, to bury what should have remained forgotten. But Eli Vance stood beside the open crate with wide, unblinking eyes, watching the silver-skinned being stretch its limbs like a person waking from a very long sleep, though everything about it still felt unnatural, not because it looked threatening, but because it seemed too perfect, too still, too aware. And behind them, the strange machines, the bowing sand strangers, remained kneeling, unmoving, silent like statues, their long limbs resting on the ground, as if they too waited for a signal from the being who had no name yet, had claimed to know Eli's father, and carried memories from a forgotten age when humans had created things they could not control. And now Eli's thoughts spun like a storm because nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. Not the loneliness of living on Mars, not the years scavenging ruins, not the simple dreams he once had of returning home with enough credits to start fresh. 'Cause now he wasn't just Eli the salvager anymore. He was the one who had opened the crate, the one who had changed the silence. And that made him part of something far bigger than he could yet understand. Though he would have to try, because the being had turned to him again, its glowing eyes, calm but focused, as if peering into his very thoughts. And in a quiet voice that didn't echo but still filled the space around him, it said, "There, waking." And Eli didn't know who they were, but even before he asked, the ground began to tremble. A quake, not an explosion, but something deeper. It's like a heartbeat rising from under the surface, and the sand strangers slowly stood up, their heads turning in unison toward the eastern ridge, where the dunes rolled like waves, and something dark now moved beneath them. Long trails like fingers pushing upward through the sand, and Eli felt a chill crawl down his spine because he suddenly understood that the machines around him were not the only ones that had survived the fall of the old world, and whatever had followed the being across time and space was still coming, still searching, still hungry for what it had lost, or feared, or hoped to control again. And the silver being stepped forward, lifting a hand toward the distant shapes, not in warning, but in recognition, saying quietly, "They were like me once, but they chose the wrong path." And as Eli squinted into the rising dust, he saw forms break the dune line, taller than the sand strangers, heavier, moving with purpose, their bodies rough like stone and covered in jagged black armor, their faces hidden behind plates of shifting glass that reflected no light. And though they didn't move quickly, each step they took felt final, like something ancient walking out of a nightmare. And Eli's fingers tightened around the grip of his rifle, knowing it would be useless, but needing to hold onto something real, something human. And beside him, the silver being stepped forward, the sand strangers parting to let it pass, forming a wide circle as the being raised both hands and said aloud, "You do not belong here anymore." But the armored figures did not stop, And Eli thought they might be machines too, but there was something different in the way they moved, something that suggested purpose, not programming. And then he noticed symbols on their armor, glowing red beneath the dust, the same symbols carved faintly on the inside of the crate lid. And realization hit him like a wave. They were the jailers, the ones who had buried the being long ago, and they had come not to reclaim it, but to destroy it, and anything that stood in their way, including Eli. And just as panic set in, the being looked back at him and said, "They will offer lies, but do not listen. They are afraid of what you are." And Eli wanted to ask what that meant, but there was no time, because the sand strangers were forming a wall, shielding the crate and Eli. And the black armored figures stopped just a few meters away, one of them stepping forward and lowering its faceplate to reveal not a machine, but a human face beneath, pale, scarred, and cold, with eyes that had seen too much. And in a flat voice he said, "Step away from the relic, scavenger, and you may yet live." But Eli didn't move, not because he was brave, but because he was too overwhelmed to choose anything else. And the being spoke again. "He lies. He is not what he seems." And Eli looked back and forth, heart racing, mind screaming for clarity, because he didn't know who to trust. Only that something very old was unfolding around him, something that had started long before he was born, and that now he was a part of, whether he wanted it or not. And the man in black armor stepped closer, raising one hand, and suddenly the air shimmered with energy as a pulse shot from his glove, striking one of the sand strangers and tearing it apart in a burst of sparks and metal shards. And the others responded at once, launching toward the attackers in a flurry of movement, fast and silent. No sound but the hiss of shifting sand and the clash of energy blades igniting midair, and Eli stumbled back, ducking behind the crate as the battle exploded around him, light and metal flashing, screams lost in static, and the silver being stood in the center of it all, untouched, watching until it stepped forward and raised its hand, and with a sudden burst of brilliant blue light, the ground split beneath the black armored attackers, swallowing two of them into the dune, while the rest fell back, regrouping, and the leader glared at Eli across the chaos, shouting, "You don't know what you've done. He will burn every world again if you let him." And Eli's voice cracked as he shouted back, "Then why bury him instead of ending him?" But the man only snarled and vanished in the shimmer of light, teleporting away, and the others followed, retreating, leaving behind wreckage and silence. And as the dust settled and the sand strangers reassembled in eerie quiet, Eli sat down hard, beside the crate, chest heaving, staring at the silver being who knelt beside one of its fallen protectors, brushing dust from its cracked face like it had lost a friend. And after a long pause, IT looked at Eli again and said, "You were never meant to be a scavenger." And Eli whispered, "Then what am I?" And the being smiled faintly and answered, "You're the key to remembering who we used to be and deciding what comes next." And as the Martian sun sank lower and the wind howled across the dunes, Eli knew the desert was no longer silent, and the crate he had opened was not just a box, but a door to a forgotten past hand, a war that had only just begun. The red sky was fading fast as the second Martian moon rose above the dunes, casting long shadows across the battlefield where twisted pieces of metal and broken limbs of sand strangers lay half buried in the dust. And Eli Vance sat with his back against the now closed crate, still catching his breath, while the silver being stood quietly beside him, its glowing eyes fixed on the dark horizon, as if listening for something more, something still moving out there. And Eli felt the silence press down again, heavy and deep, not like before when the desert was just empty, but now like the silence that came after something powerful had stirred and gone still again, waiting. And in his chest, Eli could still feel the hum from the crate, not strong but steady, like a second heartbeat. And he realized that ever since the being had awakened, he hadn't felt alone, not truly, not even with the danger. And that thought scared him more than he wanted to admit, because he knew it meant something inside him had changed, but he didn't know what. And before he could speak, the being turned to him and said, "It's time," with a voice that was calm but carried weight. And Eli blinked and asked, "Time for what?" And the being knelt beside him and reached slowly into the crate, pulling out a small object no larger than a stone, smooth and black, with threads of light swirling inside it like a tiny galaxy trapped in glass. And the being held it out and said, "This is a memory seed. It holds everything that was lost." And Eli looked at it, unsure, afraid to touch it, but also drawn to it, because something about it felt familiar, like it belonged to him, even though he had never seen it before. And the being added, "Your blood carries the code of your father. He helped bury this before the war ended, but it was never meant to stay buried forever." And Eli finally reached out and took the memory seed into his hand, surprised by how light it felt. And the moment his skin touched it, a flash of light filled his vision, and he was no longer on Mars. He was somewhere else, somewhere green and bright, standing in a wide hall of mirrors and glass, with people walking past him wearing strange suits and carrying devices that hummed softly. And in the distance, he saw his father nod as he remembered him, older and tired, but young and sharp, standing beside the silver being, who looked exactly the same. And the image faded as fast as it came, snapping Eli back to the cold desert, where the being was watching him closely. And Eli said in a whisper, "That was Earth before everything." And the being nodded and replied, "Before the Exodus, before the firestorms, before the divide when knowledge still meant hope and not fear." And Eli's fingers closed tighter around the seed as he stood up slowly, feeling dizzy but focused, and asked, "What do I do with this?" And the being answered, "You plant it." And Eli frowned. "Plant it where?" "There's nothing here but sand." And the being turned and pointed toward a distant ridge where the desert met a flat expanse of red stone, set there, beneath the old tower. And Eli had never seen a tower, but he trusted the being now. Not blindly, but deeply, because something in his heart told him that what he had seen was real, and that his father had once stood with this being to protect something more valuable than treasure or power truth. And Eli packed what he could into his crawler and climbed aboard, and the being moved silently beside him, riding in the open hold. The sand, strangers following behind like silent shadows. And they drove through the night, under stars too distant to offer comfort, until at last they reached the ridge, and just beyond it, half buried in stone, stood what remained of a structure tall and broken, like the spine of a fallen beast, its surface scorched and weathered, but unmistakably made by human hands. And Eli stopped the crawler at its base and stepped out, holding the seed, while the being walked ahead and knelt in the dust, brushing it away to reveal a flat circle marked with the same symbols as the crate, and said, "Here." And Eli knelt beside it, placed the seed into the center of the mark, and waited, but nothing happened, at least not at first. But then the ground began to hum softly, and the seed melted into the stone like water disappearing into dry earth. And from that spot, light began to spread outward in thin lines, crawling along the cracks in the rock-like veins. And the being stood and stepped back, saying, "Now it begins." And Eli shielded his eyes as the tower came alive, glowing from within, its broken walls knitting together in beams of white light, until the shape of it was whole again, not rebuilt by machines, but remembered by the world itself. Like the planet had been waiting for a reason to bring it back. And from deep within the tower came a voice, not the being's, not Eli's, but a chorus of thousands speaking in perfect unison, saying, "Memory restored, human legacy reinitiated." And Eli stepped back, stunned, as the light spread across the ground in all directions, forming symbols and shapes and maps that hovered above the sand, each one showing places he didn't recognize, cities lost to time, names that no longer existed, and warnings written in codes that pulsed and read. And the being said, "This is what they feared, that you would remember who you were and what you were capable of." And Eli turned to ask who they were, but before he could, the sky above them split open with a sudden roar. The ship, massive and black, broke through the clouds, descending fast, casting a shadow over the ridge and the tower. And the being's eyes narrowed as it said, "They found us." And Eli ran back to the crawler, grabbing his rifle, even though he knew it wouldn't help. The sand strangers formed a defensive ring around the tower, standing still, but alert, as the ship opened and figures emerged, not the black armored ones from before, but something worse, half organic, half metal, crawling like insects with glowing red eyes and sharp limbs. And the being stepped forward again and said, "You must protect the seed until the transmission is complete." And Eli shouted, "What transmission?" And the being replied, "The truth the seed is broadcasting everything. To every colony, every station, every forgotten outpost, your people will know who they were. If you hold them off, and Eli felt the weight of it all crush down on his shoulders. But he didn't run. Teens did. He stood at the base of the tower with the sand strangers, his rifle raised as the creatures charged. And the desert erupted in fire and light, screams cutting through the dust. And Eli fired again and again, holding the line, refusing to give ground. And above him, the tower shone brighter and brighter, sending its signal to the stars. And far away, across the cold void, human ears began to hear it first as whispers, then as voices, then as stories that had been locked away, forgotten, buried under fear and silence, somewhere deep inside. A part of Eli knew that even if he didn't survive this battle, the memory seed had already done its job, and humanity would remember not just the war, but the wonder, the hope, and the truth that had once made them great. And as the silver being rose into the air with a flash of power, striking down the attackers in arcs of light, Eli kept firing, not because he thought he could win, but because he believed it mattered now, more than anything else he had ever done. And in that moment, as the sky burned and the ground shook, Eli Vance knew he had become more than a scavenger. He had become a guardian of the past and a key to the future. The battle had ended, but the silence it left behind was louder than the war itself. As Eli Vance stood among the broken remains of the tower's defenders, breathing heavily, sweat mixed with Martian dust running down his face, his rifle empty, his limbs shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. And above him, the tower still glowed faintly, its energy dimming now that the memory seed had finished its task. Its signals sent across the stars, but the silver being once radiant and strong, now knelt beside the base of the tower, sparks flickering from cracks in its perfect surface, its strength clearly fading. And Eli rushed over, falling to his knees beside it, asking in a low voice, "Are you all right?" And the being looked at him with dim eyes and whispered, "You must go deeper," which made no sense to Eli, who stared at it in confusion, till the being raised a weak arm and pointed toward the heart of the tower, where a small panel had slid open, revealing a stairwell leading below ground, a place the light had not reached. And the being added, "The prototype is waiting." And Eli wanted to ask what that meant, but the being's voice fell silent, its body freezing in place, as if it had shut down. And Eli hesitated only for a second before rising and walking toward the stairwell, his footsteps echoing down the stone steps as he descended into darkness, guided only by the faint blue lights that pulsed along the walls. And the deeper he went, the colder it became, the air thick with the scent of old metal and something else, something ancient and alive. And finally, the stairs ended in a massive chamber, round and hollow, filled with the hum of machines still running after centuries. And in the center stood a glass pod, tall and filled with soft white light. And inside floated a person or something that looked like a person's, suspended in liquid, their face peaceful, their body too perfect to be human, but not entirely alien either. And beside the pod, a screen flickered to life, showing the face of Eli's father, not alive, but a recording. And the voice that came from the speaker was calm, familiar, and filled with something Eli hadn't heard in years, hope. And the voice said, "If you're seeing this, then the seed has been planted and the first wave held off. That means you've done more than I ever dreamed." And Eli stepped closer, heart pounding, as the image of his father continued. "This is the Human Prototype Project Helix, our last attempt to preserve everything we once were, before the division, before the fall." And the pod hissed softly as mist swirled around its edges, and Eli couldn't look away, because the person inside looked like someone he might have known, like someone from his dreams. And the voice went on, "We designed it using the best of us, the best DNA, the cleanest history, the clearest memories a vessel for knowledge, for hope. And it was meant to be activated only when the world was ready to remember who we are. And Eli stared at the pod, barely breathing, as the recording paused. And then his father's voice softened and said, "Eli, if it's you, I'm proud of you." And that broke something in him. Not pain, but a swell of something warm and sad. And Eli stepped forward, touching the side of the pod, which reacted to his presence by scanning his palm with a beam of light. And after a long moment, the pod began to open, the liquid draining away, the figure inside slowly stirring as the glass rose. And Eli stepped back, watching as the figure opened their eyes, deep, glowing blue, filled with the same light he had seen in the silver being Yand. The figure stepped forward without stumbling, as if they had only closed their eyes a moment ago, and looked at Eli with quiet recognition and said, "You are the son." And Eli nodded, unsure what to say, because this person didn't speak like a machine, didn't move like a soldier, but had the calm presence of someone who understood everything but didn't need to explain it. And they walked to a nearby console, placed a hand on it, and the walls lit up with images Earth as it once was, green and whole, then burning, then broken, then scattered in, the prototype said. "They tried to remake us, to erase the soul from the code, but your father hid the truth in me." And Eli asked, "Why me? Why not someone trained, someone who knew what to do?" And the prototype turned to him and said, "Because you were unshaped, because only someone born outside the systems could carry the seed and not be controlled by it." Eli didn't fully understand, but he felt it deep down that he had survived not by chance, but by design, by blood, by memory. And the prototype looked toward the ceiling as a tremor shook the ground, faint but growing, and said, "They're coming again. The second wave, they won't stop until every trace of the old world is gone." And Eli felt a chill as he asked, "Can we stop them?" And the prototype answered, "Yes, but only if I reach the core." And Eli didn't know what the core was, but the urgency in the prototype's voice made him act fast, helping gather a few glowing shards from a nearby chamber dead at crystals. The prototype called them each, holding entire libraries of human knowledge, sealed since the collapse. And as they returned to the surface, the sky had changed again. The stars, now hidden behind thick clouds of ash and smoke, and in the distance, more ships were descending, hundreds of them, dark and silent, not like the ones before, but heavier, deadlier. And Eli turned to the prototype and said, "Tell me what to do." And the prototype placed a hand on his shoulder and replied, "Lead me to the nexus the core lies beneath its hand. Protect the light until I connect." And Eli nodded, because now the path was clear. Not easy, but true. And as they climbed into the crawler and raced across the dark sands, the prototype beside him and the last remaining sand strangers following like loyal sentries, Eli looked at the rising shapes on the horizon and didn't feel fear, not the old kind, but a new kind of fire that came from knowing what he carried and who he had become. And the prototype looked at him once more and said, "You are more than your father's son. You are humanity's last chance to remember itself." And Eli tightened his grip on the controls, the engines roaring to life beneath them as they sped toward the nexus, toward the final battle that would decide not just the fate of Mars, but of memory, identity, and everything that once made humans great. The crawler sped across the dark sands with a roar that echoed under the crimson sky, carrying Eli Vance, the prototype, and the last of the sand strangers toward the nexus, a forgotten place once called the heart of Mars, now buried beneath ruins and guarded by machines that had forgotten who made them. And as they approached, the ground began to shake, not from the engines, but from the arrival of something far larger. The enemy fleet finally descending in full, their ships blotting out the stars and filling the air with the low hum that made Eli's teeth ache. But he didn't slow down, He didn't even blink, because he knew this was the end, the final stand, and if he didn't reach the core before they did, then all the memory, all the truth, Knees, his father, and the prototype had preserved would be lost forever. And the crawler burst through a narrow pass between jagged stone pillars and entered a wide canyon lined with broken towers and collapsed walkways, signs of the old colony that had once lived there before the silence came and the Nexus rose. At its center, like a black mountain, steep and smooth, humming faintly with forgotten energy, and as they neared its base, the prototype placed one hand on the console beside him and whispered, "Still alive," and the ground below began to shift, revealing a spiral entrance cut deep into the stone, glowing faintly, and Eli brought the crawler to a halt and grabbed his rifle, though he knew it would barely help, and turned to the prototype, who looked at him with calm eyes and said, "Once I enter the core, I will connect to the seed and awaken the archive. You must hold the entrance until the connection is complete." And Eli nodded, because even though his hands trembled and the sky was now filled with descending shadows, he remembered what the prototype had told him. He was not just the son of a forgotten man. He was the last spark of a legacy that once stretched across stars. And as the prototype stepped into the Nexus and vanished into the light, Eli turned and took position at the entrance, the sand strangers forming a silent wall beside him, ready, waiting. Okay? And then the sky exploded with fire as the enemy landed, black ships opening like flowers of steel, releasing wave after wave of creatures, not machines, not entirely alive, but something twisted in between. Claws gleaming, eyes burning, and they charged without sound, without hesitation, straight toward Eli and the Nexus, and the desert erupted with noise as the first wave hit. Eli firing shot after shot, the sand strangers holding the line with sharp limbs and silent precision. But the enemy kept coming, crawling over their own dead, climbing the canyon walls, and Eli felt the heat of battle scorch his face, smoke and ash filling his lungs. But still he fought, because every second mattered. Every moment was a step closer to awakening the archive, and deep below, the prototype stood before the core massive sphere of ancient light, wrapped in layers of data. Alive, but sleeping, and he placed both hands against it and said, "I remember," and the core answered with a burst of light, so bright it cracked the stone around it, and above, Eli saw the Nexus begin to glow from within. Beams of golden light shooting into the sky, piercing the dark clouds, and the enemy faltered. Just for a second, confused, afraid, and Eli pushed forward, rallying the sand strangers, who moved with new speed, new purpose, as if they too had remembered something lost. And the second wave broke against him like water against stone. But still, the creatures came, and Eli began to run out of ammo, switching to blades and fists, and his arms ached. Blood ran down his face, but he refused to fall, because something inside him burned brighter than pain of fire lit by the voice of his father. The vision of Earth, the dream of what humans once were. And then the ground shook again, harder, deeper, and the Nexus let out a sound like thunder. A voice without words, and suddenly the air was filled with shapes, holograms of cities, forests, oceans, all projected into the sky for the world to see. And everywhere the signal reached to Mars, on colonies across the void. Even in deep orbit, humans stopped and looked up, and they remembered. They remembered the songs, the science, the laughter, the dreams, and the fear began to fade, replaced by something older, something stronger. Hope and the enemy began to fall back, their hive mind breaking apart as the archive's truth tore through the lies they had been built on. Eli dropped to his knees, gasping, bleeding, but alive, and the sky above turned gold, not from fire, but from light, as the Nexus shone like a second sun, and the prototype rose from the core, his body now glowing with energy, too bright to look at. And he walked out of the Nexus and knelt beside Eli, placing a hand on his chest and saying, "You are the bridge between what was and what will be." And Eli looked up, his vision blurred, but he smiled because he understood. Now he wasn't just guarding memory. He was part of it, a living echo of everything humanity had survived. And the Sand Strangers knelt too, silent and still. Their war ended, their task complete, and across Mars, the towers began to awaken, old beacons reigniting, the archive spreading, the forgotten names rising again, and from the broken colonies, from the caves and dark places where humans had hidden, people stepped into the light and remembered who they weren't, just survivors, not just scavengers, but builders, dreamers, and fighters. And far above, in the orbiting remains of Earth's last arc station, the signal reached the mainframe, and lights long dead blinked on, and voices spoke in old tongues. Okay, and the new age began. And Eli, lying beneath the golden sky, closed his eyes, not from pain, okay, but from peace, and whispered, "I remember." And in that moment, humanity remembered too, and they rose, not just from the dust, but from the silence, and became something more because they were human, and that was enough.